This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And we are fully on the other side of the NBA playoff run. We are roughly somewhere around 20-something games remaining. And, obviously teams have made a plethora of moves to position themselves to make this final, run to position themselves to either be in the play-in or position themselves to have some type of advantage going into the first week of playoffs. And so let it not be said, man, that, some teams, they are already cashed, checked out. They're looking forward to, 2023, 24. Other teams, they still think they have a stone's throw chance. And when you look at one of the teams that we'll be having a conversation about in regards to what direction they want to move forward to, they have us scratching our heads, but at the same time, they clearly feel like the time to do what they needed to do is now. And I am really interested to get, my man 50 grand has been doing it for a long time. My partner in crime, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my man, Mr. Warren Shaw, ripping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Shaw, there's going to be two teams that we're going to be talking about in our show this week who have clearly different directions or understanding, so to speak, about what it's going to take for people to look at them and feel about them differently and their chances of trying to achieve a championship.
I kind of love what you did there. I think when you talk about the two teams that we will be discussing, if their situations were flip-flopped, I don't necessarily think we would think anything of it. We would have thought that's how it probably would have been. But they're both in positions that we didn't expect them to be, one in a good position and one in a not so great position. Although in the case of the Eastern Conference team, they are starting to make some changes that they hope will put them in the right direction. But man, it's been a wild NBA season, and it's taken us a little while to get to these two teams specifically. But man, I'm great that we're here and having the conversation now. I think it'll be a great show as always.
Absolutely. And look, man, we won't waste any people's times. I mean, we're going to be talking about the Atlanta Hawks, who obviously have been running the headlines over the last few days with its managerial moves. And then we'll also be focusing our attention on a team where most of the conversations that you typically have about them has always been in a negative connotation and or has been about the buffoonery that this organization has exhibited over the last few years. Its inability to harness and cultivate the talent that they draft, its inability to get its fans to buy into what they're trying to achieve and accomplish, and basically have always been the fledgling to the rest of the other teams out there in California. And we're not talking about the Warriors, we're not talking about the Clippers, we're not talking about the Lakers. We'll be talking about the Sacramento Kings. And is this their time? So we have got a very interesting show to give people with regards to what these two organizations are doing differently in 2022-23 that is giving us either cause for pause or is giving us some really good feels about what their outcome, their future may look like moving forward. So as always, be sure to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at Game Face Lee. The show's tuned in on NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. Be sure to go to www.baselinenba.com to catch this episode and all of our previous episodes. Also, remember too, for those of y'all who are listening to the Baseline or watching us through YouTube, you see the nice little blue symbol? That's the 19 Media Group. We rocks with the 19 Media Group. 19 Media Group, we running these content streets. So if you want to catch our show and the plethora of great quality shows that are out there, we encourage you guys to go to www.19mediagroup.com so you can find the Baseline and also the plethora of quality, talented shows that we have on the docket. You will not be disappointed. We will give you your fill of what is real. So, Shaw, we are, maybe a week removed from post NBA All-Star weekend. We've seen some of the games already play themselves out. A lot of rumors matriculating, about Kevin Durant and his proposed return, Steph Curry, his proposed return. And when we look at the landscape of how things are shaping up, the fact that people are much more confident now about the Lakers' opportunity or chances getting into the play-in. There's very little doubt about looking at the Boston Celtics and what they're doing out there in the Eastern Conference. You look at the Milwaukee Bucks and what they're doing out there. Is it far reaching that this is going to come down to the wire, that if it's really important that teams position themselves to get first round home court advantage, get best all around record, whatever the case may be, do you really foresee us going through that whole conversation that a lot of people have been leaning on with the load management, stars sitting out, this, that, and the third, when they realize that they are within, hands reach, so to speak, of giving themselves the best possible advantage for what likely is going to be a daunting gauntlet run to get to an NBA championship?
So I think it's really interesting, only from the aspect of like, so many teams, right? So many teams, and like we'll take the conversation strictly to Atlanta. Things have not gone the way that they would have hoped, liked, and expected. Um, it's we have a lot to dig into when it comes to Atlanta, and I kind of want to get into that kind of almost immediately. But Nate McMillan specifically, in his Hawks tenure, it was probably time. And they were,
it was time before the season even started.
yeah, it was probably time. And it's really interesting because I think his coaching record was 99 and 80 over the 2 years or whatever it was. So, fairly well above 500 or whatever the case may be, but just weirdness in the locker room. And, in the landscape of an Eastern Conference, the landscape of the NBA, as you were kind of pseudo alluding to, where everybody has a chance, or everybody at least feels like they have a chance, for them to not be further along, whether that be offensively capable and astute, or otherwise, was somewhat of an indictment, on Nate. Unfortunately, the offense was just still a little unimaginative, and again, it's just a time. And Atlanta specifically has gone through a lot of changes. Actually, from Schlenk moving on from the day-to-day operations in terms of the player personnel decisions, and bringing in Landry Fields, or promoting Landry Fields, and bringing in Kyle Korver and all of that, and then this kind of like now slinks in here as kind of a after All-Star news dump, if you will, and the Hawks move on from their coach. I find the Hawks situation specifically very interesting, but it's probably really, really, truly in retrospect, kind of what you're saying in terms of everybody feeling like they're having a chance, and Atlanta felt like maybe their chances were slipping away.
Probably. When I say this, right, I say this respectfully. And I know sometimes when you hear what I say, you'll be like, oh, damn. And then I'm like, let me finish where I'm going with this. But I want to hearken this back to the numerous amount of opportunities that the Atlanta Hawks had in moving John Collins. Now, I am not saying that the reason that not moving John Collins is the reason that the Hawks offense is what it is or whatever. But I will say that if you really unpackage this whole thing, the desire not to move him as urgently as necessary obviously showed a divide in philosophical thinking about what kind of offense the Atlanta Hawks want to carry with Trae Young, and what that looks like as him being the premier guard that he reflects and represents. You get what I'm saying? He's not Steph Curry. Steph Curry makes other players not look good, but he makes them play good. He accentuates a lot of the things that they know that they can do well, and then he still goes out and does his thing with confidence. I think you can make an argument that the reason why you'll never make that comparison with Trae Young is because Trae Young has never been put in that situation. Everything has been kind of curtailed around him, right? And the players who are playing with him or next to him are suddenly, slowly but surely, losing themselves. So we'll never know how great John Collins really can be, right? Because unless you're saying he's attached to the hip of someone like Trae Young, you'll always point the finger towards someone like Trae Young and say, we want him doing X, Y, and Z, score 30-something points, maybe give us 8, 9, and 10 assists, or whatever the case may be. But we don't know that if whether or not a John Collins and his athleticism and what he was showing us in the beginnings before Trae Young came on board was giving us the good feels about whether or not he could be a premier forward in this game of basketball. And so now we're at this crossroads where any decision that is being made, I think, can either compromise the integrity of the organization's perspective about what this team is going to look like, or is going to compromise the star power that Trae Young has established for himself. And I'm only using the John Collins caveat to speak to the fact that any moves that have been made over the last couple of seasons have now been fully blurred, because it's never been with the confidence that Nate McMillan is going to make it work for these guys. As much as when Nate McMillan came in, he was coming in to patch everything. And I don't think that the organization ever gave him the confidence that he had the vision of putting something on paper in front of fans, in front of the organization, that made them feel like this is how we can move forward with Nate McMillan. Somewhere along the lines, there were still strings being pulled. And now we have seen those strings loosen. And the Atlanta Hawks have a decision to make about the next person that they're bringing in. They have to be forward thinking, which is why I think they were so aggressive in going after a Quinn Snyder.
Man, there's a lot to unpack there. So let me try to start with JC, with John Collins. If you were to believe some rumors, there are things that were said that they maybe had a deal with Phoenix in place before the Durant situation unveiled itself. And obviously you go and make a move for Kevin Durant 1,000 times out of 1,000. But John Collins,
JC, KD.
I mean, so John Collins was almost a son by some people's reports, and he might have almost been a Miami Heat. I almost might have been a Cleveland Cavalier.
He was in the NBA shop in Atlanta looking for that Phoenix Suns jersey, trying it out for size, and then no, hold on.
No. Put that back. Put that back.
Your locker room. Go back to your locker room.
So I won't hold Atlanta to at fault there, but if you trace it back to a time when they seemed to have so much promise, which was really just a couple seasons ago, right? They make it to the Eastern Conference Finals. You're thinking about, wow, this team might really be on the come up. And you're like, hey, they're going to have to do a consolidation trade at some point, because you can't pay Kevin Huerter and Cam Reddish and DeAndre Hunter, like all those guys. Hunter's still there, and they paid Collins, so they felt they had all these good vibes. And I'll have to give you a lot of credit, because I think you thought it was a little bit of fool's gold at that time. And it turned out to be exactly that. And Travis Schlenk, even last year, with some weirdness, it's like, yeah, you know what? Part of this is on me and the way that we're moving and playing. But Nate McMillan is a guy, as a coach who for lack of a better phrase, just continues to always seem to have like a certain level of a shelf life. And I know I've used that phrase many times over the years in our show. And I think it's just one of those things where it kind of wore. Trae Young doesn't seem to be the easiest person in the world to coach. Might have a little bit of, a little bit of an identity crisis, where he thinks he's old or feel he should be able to do whatever he wants, but hasn't really been able to accomplish a whole lot yet. But again, they got to the conference finals, and that's more than a lot of the teams can say, especially in recent years. So it put, I think, McMillan and even the front office into a little bit of a juxtaposition. It's like, all right, well, how much power do we give this guy in terms of Trae Young's per se? And then when he and Nate McMillan started to grade a little bit, well, the coach is always going to be the first one to ultimately go. So you take all those things. It's like this is a conversation really kind of like 2-3 years here in the making, right? And it's ironic because the previous coach, who Nate took over, he came in and quote unquote saved their season, if you will. So it's just really funny to see how quickly things continue to evolve and change in Atlanta. But at the center of the storm and some of the dysfunction, if you will, is Trae Young. And I won't go so far. I'm only going to repeat it and say that what's being talked about in some circles is Trae Young a coach killer? And I'm not going to go that far and say that per se. I mean, I think that's harsh, but he hasn't quite figured out a way to manage what the coach's expectations are and what his own personal expectations are for that team's success. If that makes sense.
So let me. You unpacked quite a few things. I feel like this is Christmas. We're just giving each other gifts of unpacking. That's going to take all.
Your turn to pass the baton.
Let me try to unpack a few things for you here. Okay, so number one, as it pertains to what you were saying regarding Trae Young and the coach killer thing. I don't want to lose that, because that is a very interesting. I'd be quick to say something like that when it comes to certain players and their attitude and the way that they handle things. And we've already seen some instances of Trae Young and his pushback against Nate McMillan and the coaching staff, which already tells you that there is some animosity there. Let's not get that twisted. Guys don't do this type of stuff, and it doesn't leak itself out without there being some signals being thrown out there that a player has a problem with how things are ran or how they're being treated, or, what the perception is. And you and I even were on the show talking about how, if this was really an issue, the Atlanta Hawks could have came out and said something about it. The fact that this thing was kind of lazing around for quite a bit, to me, seems like, hey, well, this is your point. You go clean up this mess. You go, PR your way out of this particular thing, because we want people to really understand the true Trae Young, right? So it's interesting that you use that particular word, not to say that you depict him in that way, but that is already the air that's out there, not because of Nate McMillan, but because of everything that has led to this particular point. Because let's be frank. Nick McMillan came in and saved the Atlanta Hawks season doesn't necessarily mean that this was Nate McMillan's team, right? We've often said, for most coaches, you show me a coach who truly believes in the team that he wants to coach, and you probably will see the best version of that coach and that team and that season. You give me a coach who has to figure these things out, you better hope he gets 2-3 years to work with this. You better hope that there's some stability in the organization and the way that they do these deals and things of that nature, because I guarantee you these ups and downs are a reflection of how much that organization is searching and hoping that the coach that they hire is going to bail them out, right? And look no further than the Detroit Pistons. You know what I'm saying? So Nate McMillan, to me, is no different in this particular circumstance and situation. What I was going to say to you before you started getting into a whole litany of other things that now has got me feeling all about this whole conversation. But one thing I was going to say is, don't you find it interesting that they don't move John Collins, but they've moved Bogdanovic, they've moved Kevin Huerter, they've moved DeAndre Hunter. And I would want to ask you, Shaw, if you
they still have Hunter and Bogdanovic.
They have Hunter. I'm sorry.
They moved Huerter and Reddish, right?
They moved Reddish. And all of those guys were a part of that team that got to the Eastern Conference Finals. But if I were you, let me ask you this question. If you're saying, if you go up to Trae Young and you asked him, Trae, if you had to keep such and such dudes, you tell us who you think we should keep and who you know that we're going to probably have to move. If I'm Kevin Huerter, if I'm Reddish, if I'm any of those other guys that got moved, and I felt like if there's a way that I can be here and do what we just did, don't you think that I would take probably less money to do it if I knew that down the road I could see myself being a part of something bigger? I mean, to me, it speaks in divide of two things. Trae Young has got his own plan, and Nate McMillan has got his own plan, but neither one of their plans were ever in sync. And because the organization didn't definitively have an idea of what this team needs to be like and look like, look at what they've had to do and what they gave up. And at the end of it, they wound up exactly where we were saying they were going to wind up being, because I felt like they overachieved. They overachieved on the idea that they just no longer wanted to be, the laughing stock of the Eastern Conference. It was like 1 year of motivation from that. But at the end of it, they never came together and really figured this thing out.
Yeah. So there's a couple more things here. So when you look at Trae Young's numbers specifically, I think there's this perception that he's this miraculous knockdown, Steph Curry light, maybe 3-point shooter. You know what I mean? Walmart brand, maybe to some degree. I know that's a negative connotation, but he's a 33%, really 32.9% 3-point shooter this year. On 2.2 makes per game. And 6.7 attempts. Like, it's not voluminous, right? And I think what ends up happening is you see he takes the 30-footers and the 40-footers or whatever, and you go, oh yeah, he's a shooter just because he's pulling up from out there. Doesn't make him this knockdown guy. What you said at the end, though, is really, really important. And it's been talked about, I think, in a lot of podcasts, NBA circles, or whatever. Nate McMillan and Trae Young were not able to marry their ideas of success together to make the Atlanta Hawks successful as a unit. And Trae felt he needed to do what he needed to do, shoot in the way that he needed to shoot. And it's funny because it's almost the Russell Westbrook syndrome, because he's averaging 10 assists a game, right? So, whoa, he can't be selfish. And then you really kind of dig into some of those things. You like some of those numbers are inflated and don't really don't tell the true story of the impact that he's having when he's on the floor. But again, the team acquiesced and got him a running partner. So to your earlier point, and when they got rid of Herter and they got rid of Reddish and whatever the case would be, and to some degree when they paid John Collins and then kept trying to deal him, the fact that Collins wasn't moved in that DeJounte Murray deal was still surprising to me. That the Spurs like, nah, we good. We just want the draft picks. We don't consider Collins that level of talent that we want to bring in here and have him interfere with whatever we have going on. But they acquiesced and got him a true number two, and DeJounte, who is not somebody who takes a lot of shots per se, but could supposedly complement him, and that just hasn't worked. But that's everybody's fault, everyone's fault. So from the front office to the coaches to the players themselves. But any coach worth his proverbial salt, as you know, it is just one of those things. Like the captain has to go down with the ship. And you have to get the players to buy in. And I understand we're not in the Tim Duncan, Greg Popovich days where Duncan is just going to allow himself to be coached and coached hard in that way. It's not even, maybe it's almost like talking about a 4-letter word in here now, but in the respect of Tatum and Brown, where when Udoka was there, where they allowed themselves to be coached hard. They were like, listen, you know what? We need this if we're going to try to get to the next level. Trae did not find that with Nate McMillan, and Nate McMillan did not find that with Trae. And I don't want to make it only about them, but those are the two heads of the snake, if you will, that try to put the things off to the rails. And now they're fishing around to bring back, I guess, Quinn Snyder, which I think is again, Quinn's obviously a great coach, but it's just really, really interesting to see how Atlanta sees this unfolded. And as we record, they're a 500 team. 8th place in the Eastern Conference, so they'll definitely have a shot here in the playoffs. And I don't know how, if they turn it around, how much noise they'll make, because there's no more roster moves to be made at this point. It's all about rotations.
You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we are getting knee deep in our conversation about the Atlanta Hawks and the recent news regarding Nate McMillan's firing, and ultimately the deal being put in place that Quinn Snyder will be the new head coach for the Atlanta Hawks. So let's go ahead and transition into that real quick, Shaw, when we talk about the Atlanta Hawks. Okay. Quinn Snyder's coming in. Quinn Snyder is not
presumably. As we record, presumably.
Right. Well, let's just assume they're going to get this deal done. I feel like Wojnarowski is not going to waste our time with this idea. And if you're the Atlanta Hawks, and now that it's out there in the NBA sphere, so to speak, you got to get this done. You cannot just suddenly put his name out in any connection with regards to the Hawks after doing what you just did and then failing on bringing this guy, right? Especially since it's already been leaked out that they said this is all about getting Quinn Snyder. So we're not even going to mess around and give him options for other teams to look at him in the middle of the season, which is probably the reason why I'm saying, wow, this is a completely different approach by the Atlanta Hawks. This is them actually standing firm into the soil here. You know what I'm saying? They are fully planted. And their expectation is that they want a Groot growing out of that damn soil. They want something growing out of here, fierce, monstrous. They want a new culture. They want a new vision. And they're not going to wait around for the offseason where coaches are going to, basically have all of the teams looking at them to either add as an assistant coach or whatever the case may be. Quinn Snyder is obviously seeing himself saying, hey, I'm open. You come to me. Are you going to wait now? And the Hawks are like, yo, we coming to you. Here's what we coming with. Is this good enough? So I think it's just semantics. But let's just say if nothing else, Shaw, he's finally on board. He ain't dealing with a Donovan Mitchell. He's dealing with a Trae Young. And that's where I'm got to be like, wow. When they brought Quinn Snyder in, he was supposed to be an offensive innovator for the Utah Jazz. And somehow, some way, he became this defensive guru where the Utah Jazz were a top 5 defense during the years that he basically was the head coach. Even though the best that they had ever gotten to was to the Western Conference semis, right? If not that, they did get at least out of the first round once, right? So outside of that, that is the brunt of Quinn Snyder's success. Albeit, though, when that organization, the franchise was in chaos, he came in, he put everything back in its place, and now you see some level of streamlined success that's carrying over after Quinn Snyder, which is a good thing. But now we're talking about with the Atlanta Hawks, and you're talking about winning games in a very fierce Eastern Conference. And he has to work with a guy like Trae Young. That's the reason why I'm sitting here saying to myself, wow, he has got his work cut out for him because he can get the rest of these other guys to buy in. I just don't know if whether or not what he does and how he does things is going to convince a guy like Trae Young in a city like Atlanta, which at times gets more attracted to the stardom than to the winning.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it comes down to both Trae and DeJounte and Capella and John Collins kind of wanting to understand this. Like, hey, if we want to have the success we had a few seasons ago, at least getting to conference finals, we have to kind of buy into a certain level of defense and offensive ball movement where everybody touches the ball. And yeah, we can have our alphas. There's nothing wrong with that. That's how the NBA is built. It's built on star power. But Trae himself has to be able to be more trusting and a little bit more creative, I think, at times as well. And, to me, I'm a little bit surprised that when you talk about Trae's overall numbers this year, that they're not more efficient when DeJounte is a capable table setter. So to me, Trae should be getting better looks now that DeJounte is there, not worse, and shooting worse percentages, like in terms of since his rookie season. Those things just haven't connected to me. But part of that is on the unimaginative offense that Nate McMillan was also running. But again, he and Nate and Trae not necessarily buying into each other, whatever that may look like. If Quinn Snyder ends up ultimately being the coach, and I think it's, like you said, a pretty safe bet that he will, he has the chops, I think, on both sides of the basketball where he should have enough cachet. And he has worked with a star, and all NBA talent in Donovan Mitchell before. Even Rudy Gobert, similarities to Clint Capella and things like that, right? So I think it's a hiring.
I know that this is going to sound crazy, but I don't think Snyder. I think Capella's days are numbered. Even though Capella exhibits exactly the traits of Rudy Gobert, which is interesting to me because I'm like, look, if Snyder has to work with a John Collins, and it's always kind of like, I've never quite understood this, why Collins is just not playing the 5. Just go ahead and put that dude in the 5. He's really not, he's not a great shooter. He's a decent shooter. He's not
stretchy enough. I get you.
Not stretchy enough. So like my whole thing is like now because Capella is constantly injured, there was numerous, and probably to your point, this could also be a reason of an indictment to the unimagination Nate McMillan. McMillan should have been using Collins a lot more in the 5. It should have had him and his physicality establish a better, because this team from a rebounding perspective to me was never a good rebounding team. Collins could always be that guy, like in the beginning, like he's a streaky rebounder, but so was Jaren Jackson. And look at what Jaren Jackson is giving the Memphis Grizzlies now. Like he's growing into his own. And I feel like Collins' growth is stunted. Capella is wayward. You know what I'm saying? And the blame is going to always be on the guys like Trae Young because he's supposed to be that guy. He got them to that certain place a few years ago. But again, that's part of that unimagination that we were talking about before.
Yeah, and I think with Snyder too, they have to figure out ways to probably better activate Okongwu as well, and figure out what type of rotation Capella, Collins, and Okongwu play. Okongwu is not stretching at all either, so I mean you lose a lot of spacing, especially when you have DeJounte on the floor as well too. While DeJounte is he's not afraid to shoot it, and he's actually shooting 36% from 3 this year. He's not something that I consider knocked down. So again, I think if you have him in that corner, he's probably pretty a safe bet from there. But other spots of the floor, maybe not as not as effective. So offensively, they got to figure some stuff out. Bogdanovich probably still needs to play a bigger role in the spacing of that too. And all that's going to be rotationally based. I love to talk to Atlanta Hawks fans who maybe have been watching them, religiously and kind of all 48 minutes of every single game, whereas you and I necessarily haven't been doing that. We have kind of a broad stroke picture of what it is, but they have a bunch of guys who are capable of scoring in double digits and a bunch of guys who are actually averaging double digits this year. But that's because a lot of injuries. And so the staggering of when people have been able to get the bulk of their points or their minutes played has come at the expense of other guys not necessarily being there. So it'll be interesting to see now. And they have to institute Sadiq Bey, who they acquired in the trade at the trade deadline. So it is a lot, it's a lot, but I still think they're capable and in some ways still very dangerous. But it's not going to be something that they can just snap their fingers and fix. Quinn Snyder's, that's why that's why I suspect they're not as anxious to let Joe Prunty kind of finish out the season. They want to bring in an established coach like Snyder to come into this situation and see if they can catch lightning in the bottle, similarly to when they brought Nate in, a couple of years ago. But because the East is so at least perceived to be wide open, they feel like they can maybe do some of these things to fix it on the fly, but an experienced coach like Snyder would be the guy to help them do that.
Well, look, the Atlanta Hawks are mirroring the Minnesota Timberwolves when they brought in Chris Finch, right? And they saw the success, and I think that they probably believe that that will typically happen with a guy who is embedded in understanding culture and is good at cultivating and bringing together the kind of culture very quickly. I think they believe that Quinn Snyder is best equipped to do that, regardless of whether or not they've got an interim head coach and Punty, handling these things now. And I think they also truly believe, look, if this season is a wash, they don't make the playoffs, they have no regrets, because the long-term solution is having Quinn Snyder there to turn things around. I will say this, and this is probably part of the reason why, again, I don't want to harken anymore about the Nate McMillan thing, and I know we have to move on with our conversation regarding the Sacramento Kings. But when you looked at the games at least the games that I've watched when the Atlanta Hawks have played, or I've seen games when the Atlanta Hawks have played like the New York Knicks, and I would listen to it on radio, on my way from home or whatever the case may be. The Atlanta Hawks, I've never been a team that have looked like they can come out of the gate and just be explosive. They are always starting from behind. They are horrible in the first and second quarters of their, statistically, and they're always playing catch up. They may have impressive runs, maybe late in the second quarter going into the third, but there's been way too many instances of them being on double-digit deficits to start games out with. And you just can't afford to do that. You know what I'm saying? You can't afford to be a legitimate team contending when you're constantly playing from behind every single time. And at some point, it will catch up with you. The fatigue, the pressure, whatever, it will catch up with you. It's not a good look. And I think maybe that is what lent to what happened to McMillan's exit, so to speak. He just did not get these guys prepared to come out the gate firing. And maybe with Quinn Snyder, that's what they'll probably look to try and do moving forward, is to be a team that establishes themselves, imposes their will a lot earlier than later. And I will say this much, Shaw. When your calling card is defense, and that no longer is what is a reflection of what this team looks like, regardless of the personnel that's coming in and out on that lineup and that roster, you're losing out on whatever you have to maintain your, importance to the organization and to the team. And if nothing else, like, look, maybe he can't control Trae Young, but he can still control the rest of those other guys out there that play far better defense than what I've seen the Atlanta Hawks playing this past season. Like, their defense has not been good at all. So if that's the only reason why you were hanging on to Nate McMillan, then, he didn't have much of a leg to stand on when his teams are giving up anywhere in excess of 125 to 130 points per game. And we feel like, that's the norm, but it's inexcusable for a team that doesn't shoot the basketball well. That means you need to get back to stopping the other teams from scoring as many points as you're capable of scoring.
Well said, man. Well, we've buried the Atlanta Hawks here, or
I feel like it's an autopsy. That's what that is.
Well, at least the tenure of Nate McMillan has been buried. So, shout outs to coach. He still is a great individual, good dude, and I'm sure he'll catch on somewhere along the line.
It just wasn't going to work out in Atlanta. You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, we are going to discuss the Sacramento Kings. What are they sipping on out there, man? That beam must be full of vibranium or something, man, because they on some Black Panther shit right now. They lighten up everybody that they see. And then even De'Aaron Fox, man, he coming out like, like Snowfall. He just like, I don't give a damn who's on the other side. I won't use the select words he used. But he definitely on something, man, and we love every single minute of it. So we'll talk about them here on the flip side on the Baseline. Time to break it down to the bone gristle. We are back. Callie Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast. And as we continue our conversation regarding a team that is just on some fire right about now. And listen, I didn't see this one coming. I thought maybe it was going to take another couple years before we actually see something blossom with Mike Brown under the helm. But the Sacramento Kings, man, they are a team that I don't think a lot of people, if they're not trying to talk about them, it's probably because they fear them and because they don't want to deal with the plethora of talent, with the moxie, the outright just braggadociousness that this team is exhibiting right now, because they truly believe that they are one of the top teams in the Western Conference. Now, I don't know if whether or not they're one of the top teams in the NBA, but if you basically come out to Sacramento and that beam is up out there in the sky, it's either one of two things. the opposing team is probably, shipping and, alien life forms to deal with these dudes that night, or the Sacramento Kings are on one and they just lighten up whoever they're playing up against, man. And you know what, Shaw? I think that is good for the NBA.
Well, this is a team that is almost anti-Cal game face league because they play no defense. This is the offensive juggernaut first.
Well,
First
listen,
in offensive
if you're gonna be confident and like F a defense because we're gonna outscore you, well, damn it, go out there and outscore them.
God,
Just be true to who you are.
Yeah, man, 120 points per game, 7th in 3-point attempts and makes, 9th in 3-point percentage, 5th in assist, 9th in pace. Like they just get it done offensively. 2nd in 2-point field goal percentage. It's just and 3rd in overall field goal percentage. And the antithesis, 29th in opponent's field goal percentage.
Shaw, they are in the quantum realm, right?
And 29th in defending the three. So the one good thing, a couple good things there.
Brown was a defensive guru. He says,
nope.
To hell with the defense. Yeah.
Light the match and light the beam. That's Mike Brown. So that beam is not doing any defense. It's not like the Death Star out there. That is all about, shooting and killing it with fire. The Sacramento team is a lot of fun to watch. When I watch, you wouldn't look at like Domas Sabonis and think, oh yeah, that's a road runner. If you watch him play for as fast as he can go, he be hauling ass up and down the floor. He gets a rebound. He's like, let's push it. So he's quicker than your average bear, I suppose. And he'd be trying to get up to court and initiate offense in a way.
Day, like, what did you were watching Yogi? Don't you? It's okay.
It's wild. Okay. But I like Sabonis a lot. And I just he does so much for them offensively. And a lot of that is just with his ability to rebound and go and then still create. And it's not just all dribble handoffs. He makes passes, off the catch, from the free throw line, from the post, and really just kind of initiating the offense almost like a guard at times. And De'Aaron Fox has accepted that. As the true quote unquote point guard on the team, he allows Sabonis to and they just figured out a way to make that marriage work. And because everybody is getting their shots now, De'Aaron is averaging 25 a game and just really kind of lightening it up. And with the addition of Malik Monk was a masterstroke for them in the offseason, prying him away from the Lakers. And Malik Monk is really doing wonders for them, I think, offensively, in addition to the aforementioned Kevin Huerter in our previous segment. So a lot of great things, I think, offensively for Sacramento. And they have this air about them that they just don't care. And I can't remember. I think it was actually I was checking out our good friend Jabari on one of his podcasts or his shows, the Jab Step. When somebody brought it in, is like, listen, yeah, it's a great story for now, but have they handcuffed themselves? And I said, well, 16 years they haven't made the playoffs, and I think they want to crawl before they run at this point, and they feel like, hey, they got a little bit of a head start, and they'll figure out the rest as they go. This is a very, very, very exciting team that is offensively gifted and going to be a problem in the Western Conference. And I think their playoff drought is definitely going to end this season.
Oh yeah, and listen, if this is their version of running, you want to see him sprint. Like here, look at the way that this team is structured, Shaw. Which again, it's crazy to me to say this, but this is the reason why there is sustainability in what the Sacramento Kings are doing. Now, I don't know if it means that they're going to win. What I'm saying is sustainable because they've got players in which the way that Mike Brown and the coaching staff has put everything out there, they're like, we want you to do what we brought you here to do and go do it. Don't half-ass it. Don't question it. Go do it. And sometimes for young players, that's really all they need. Because when you're so used to losing, you lose your way in whatever level of confidence you have to be able to contribute that is necessary for the team's success. It gets kind of lost in the sauce, so to speak, right? And we can talk about that in contrast to what we're seeing in Atlanta. Do you think that the way that Kevin Huerter is playing out in Atlanta, where there was a level of rigidness and discipline, also maligned by having a guard who has to have the ball in his hand so much that there's a trepidation in his ability to say, when am I going to get the ball? And when I get the ball, I got to make the shot count. He doesn't worry about that with the rest of the dudes that he plays for out there in Sacramento. And maybe that's a lesson well learned by Mike Brown being in Golden State, because this is very similar, right? And we've seen this. Even when Walton was the head coach, that was what he wanted for his guys. The problem is that they just never made the shots count. They just weren't good. They didn't practice hard enough. They didn't make it count when it mattered most. The Kings right now are doing that, man. And that's exactly the reason why, if you are a fan of watching a team just be offensively explosive, it's because they are confident about their ability to score the basketball. Now, if you're talking about winning a championship, this is a completely different subject and conversation altogether, because there's no way in hell they're going to win this championship. They have to learn how to stop the other team. But if you're going to believe that the way to get there, to get to that point where to even have that conversation, is by just shooting the lights out of the damn place, well, you know what? Just like you said, 16 years of being in the doldrums, to being the laughingstock, damn it, man, you shoot until there's nothing left in the chamber. You get yourself to that point where you're at least in the conversation, and then you worry about whatever it is you have to worry about later. And you know, we've seen this time and time again. We've seen it when the Golden State Warriors had Baron Davis. We've seen it when the Dallas Mavericks, right? The years when they had Avery Johnson and them dudes. They had no behavior mentality about the way that they go out there and execute, and it got them to a point where we talk about them endlessly until it all comes to a stop. And then reality sets in. Offseason kicks in. You look at everything, the landscape, you look at your wins, your losses, what you did well, what you need to improve on, and then you start putting the pieces together to shore up those things. But the confidence level can never be confused, because the Sabonis's, the Foxes, the Monks, all of them had a part. The Waiters, they all had a part. The Barnes, they all had a part in the success of what is going to be a magical season for the Sacramento Kings.
Yeah, for me, Brown just being able to, like, there's some guys here who played last year and played a pseudo-significant role, aka Harrison Barnes, aka even Rashawn Holmes. Like, those guys played big minutes and had a different role last year, and now, and winning cures all, I guess. Even Davion Mitchell, like, there's a lot of controversy about how many minutes he should be getting and whether or not he's the future or whatever the case would be. I think we know offensively he's nowhere near where he needs to be on the floor on a 30-minute to 35-minute per night basis, so to speak. But all those three guys specifically all had and thought they might have had bigger roles this year and haven't. And you haven't really heard anything negative about it because the Sacramento Kings are winning. So they get the minutes that they get and they contribute.
About Keegan, you know, and he is as intricate a part for them, you know, in the success that we've seen.
In addition to Keegan Murray, you know, who they're still trying to integrate too, you know, and figure out how he's going to work himself out. It's interesting now because it's not to be overly revisionist, but I know they got killed for not taking Jaden Ivey, killed in the draft, and it just didn't fit their need. And it's whether should they trade it out or did whatever something else in order to, you know, maximize the options at that pick. Whether Keegan Murray or not is going to be, you know, the next guy, and, you know, I don't know that he is. I think he fit what they needed at that moment. Now, are they landlocked for a little while? Maybe, potentially. That could very well be true, but fixing a drought of 16 years, I think was paramount to them. It's almost going to be, I mean, it's even worse. Obviously, it's the longest drought, I think, in professional sports, right? But them making the playoffs is going to be nothing short of like the Timberwolves, you know, when Pat Beverly, you know, got them over the hump, if you will. So I think they'll have a little bit more decorum than the T-Wolves did at that time, and understand, you know, making the playoffs is not winning the NBA championship, and a celebration and a parade shouldn't happen. But a 16-year drought is noteworthy, and I think Mike Brown turns out to be the right hire. And we all knew, and all NBA circles said, hey, offensively, this team was going to be good. I don't know if they thought to be this good and would be able to overcome their lack of defense in a way that has them sitting third in the Western Conference as we record.
Now, so two things, all right? The first thing I'm going to allude to is about the offense, to what we're saying. And I'm speaking highly of the offense, but I also want to come down to earth about a couple of things. It would be a different conversation if teams like the Golden State Warriors were playing better this year, like the Portland Trailblazers with Damian Lillard and Anthony Simons were playing better this year. The bar raised in the offensive capabilities, I would be very curious to see. We measure up what the numbers are saying to us about what the Sacramento Kings are doing when these other teams who have always been offensively efficient, offensively worldly and everything like that, like what that would look like. And we buy into, is it sustainable what the Sacramento Kings are doing, right? But they are the standard. They are ultimately the standard right now, and I'm taking nothing from that. And if I'm Brown and them guys, I keep going. I push it all the way until it can no longer be pushed. That's my first point. My second point is this. If I was a doctor and I said to you, what would happen if Arvydas Sabonis and Detlef Schrempf had a baby? You know what you would have a Domantas Sabonis. And those are two of my favorite players during our generation growing up watching basketball out there in the Western Conference outside of Gary Payton and Sean Kemp. I used to love watching Detlef Schrempf, even though he was playing for the Pacers for most of his career. But I used to love watching Detlef Schrempf and Arvydas Sabonis and those guys do their thing. It made me have an appreciation for international basketball before there was the Tony Kukocs, you know what I'm saying, of the world and things of that nature. And when I see Sabonis going out there and play, he reminds me so much of why we have to exercise a little bit of patience when it comes to these international players, man. We have to exercise a little bit of patience of their ability. They are much smarter than I think people are giving credit for. Now, maybe they may not be as quickly on the upstart of stardom as people would like. You won't put them on that gravy train, because they gotta play like Luka Doncic. They gotta play like, Steve Nash. And, I think we were spoiled but look at what it took for Dirk Nowitzki to elevate himself. This was not a 1 or 2 or 3 year thing. And Sabonis came in at an early time. And somehow he has navigated himself through all of the nonsense that has happened to him, being bounced around by so many different teams, and is still putting up effective numbers. I feel like if Mike Brown and the Sacramento Kings have anything in them, they need to see him the same way the Kings saw Peja Stojakovic, the same way that they saw Vlade Divac. They got to look at that guy and they got to figure out a way not to build around him, but build within him so that he continues to be the great player that he is. It's a shame that he continues to get marginalized and moved. I hope that he stays in Sacramento. I think that is the place to be. And if you give him a guy like a De'Aaron Fox, that kind of combination is only going to make things better for him. And I think it'll only make things better for the Sacramento Kings. It'll be interesting. I hope that they believe that that's the dynamic of their future. I really want to see that flourish and grow, because that to me is the counter to what we're seeing out in Denver with Jokic and Murray. You know what I'm saying? Like, those are the combinations I want to see flourishing now in this current NBA climate, because I think it can do some serious damage in our conversations about, does defense really matter to win a championship? Not when you got those dynamic playmakers out there on the basketball court.
Yeah, and I think, again, do you have the guys around them that buy in to do those things? So does at some point David Mitchell figure out a way where he's not, I won't say a liability, but he's more offensively potent than he is currently. And then he can still have those defensive chops where he can be out there on the floor with De'Aaron Fox more often, as opposed to instead of, right? Because it just completely changes what they're going to be able to do. But your point about Sabonis, man, he's remarkably consistent, 18.9, 18.9, 18.9, 18.8 this year. Those are his last, 4 years in terms of his PPGs. Right. And then he's averaging a career high 6.9 assists, tying a career high. No, actually not even career high in 34.5 minutes. To me, Sabonis and the combination with Mike Brown, that's where you've seen something work. Those guys say, hey, we buy into this. And maybe because it's offensive and it's flowing and it's fun. Let's push the tempo. Let's get a bunch of shots up. Let's score 120 a night. Not too many NBA players are going to balk at that. Maybe a Pat Beverly, you know what I mean? But most guys are going to be like, yo, let's get up and down the floor and let's get it popping. And I think Brown has allowed Sabonis and Fox specifically to kind of be able to master the offense in that domain and filling in around them. Malik Monk and Kevin Huerter are knockdown guys, and they terrorize defenses with their ability to shoot the three-point shot. Even Keegan Murray has shown some chops here and there throughout the course of the season in his rookie year. So it's working in Sacramento. I'm really happy for Coach Brown and really happy for this Kings franchise, so they can stop being called the Kangs and really get into the next situation where they're trying to build.
It might not be a bad thing you want to call them the Kangs, right? Who right now is like blazing, you know what I'm saying, the whole conversation of the Marvel universe, our boy Jonathan Majors, right? My man doing some things in 2023. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? And if you're going to be the Kings, well, be Kang the Conqueror. You know what I'm saying? Conquer some shit. That's what we want to see, because this version of the Sacramento Kings, I'm telling you right now, Shaw, we're talking about matchups. And as long as the Sacramento Kings continue to keep winning basketball games, I think the matchups are going to look more and more favorable. The only thing that I think that'll be in question is, do they have the experience? Will they not bitch up when it really matters in your first round of the playoffs? You know what I'm saying?
Like, slip that in there, just bitch up.
Yeah,
he just said that so smooth.
Yeah. I want to see these. Like, look, if you're gonna show us this attitude, you want to show us this I don't give a what attitude in the press conference, then I'm just saying, don't suddenly now, because you gotten into the playoffs, you're gonna just stop being that way. Be that way. Be true to who you are. If you're gonna be that confident, then go out there and be that confident. Don't shuck and jive. Don't try to make it look nice. You know what I'm saying? There's no reason for it. Everybody everyone in the world, it doesn't think you have a stone throw's chance of making it beyond, the first round. They think that whoever it is you wind up playing against is going to probably knock you out in the first round. So all I'm saying is I just want to see them be confident. And the only thing that it becomes in doubt is not a question of the talent, but a question of the timeliness of executing that talent. Let that be the reason why. If that other team out there to beat you is because they beat you because they just flat out were better than you. You know what I'm saying? And that's just what it is. You're playing against some legends. You're playing against some superstars, and this just wasn't your time. I would rather that be the conversation. But I don't ever want the conversation to be about us doubting how talented the Sacramento Kings team is, because they really are a talented team, Shaw. And I'm hoping that the organization recognizes that and doesn't make foolish decisions and moves that compromises the work that it got Mike, the work that it took Mike Brown to put these guys in a position to now show and exhibit that, because we're soaking it all in. And if you're an NBA fan, you gotta love that.
Yeah, I believe it was Monte McNair. It was kind of another thing that just kind of happened in the news cycle. I think the Kings already extended him, just by the outlook of where things are going for Sacramento this year. And I think when it comes down to their ability to make moves after this, a lot is going to depend on how they go in and ultimately come out of the playoffs. How attractive are they now to free agents in any capacity? And I know they won't have a whole lot of money to make a lot of moves. But in general, who says, you know what, Darren and Sabonis, those are fun dudes. I want to be a part of that. Can I come in here and add my expertise, to that situation? And a really big thing to consider for them, Sacramento, it just kind of went under the radar because he was talking about being moved last year and wasn't. His Harrison Barnes contract comes off the books. So do they just re-up? I mean, he's only 30. So do they just re-up and give him a team-friendly deal, 15, 16 mil per, 4-year deal, and, whatever, maybe player or team options in the end? Or do they clear the way and allow Keegan Murray to kind of take that spot and then figure out how they can add anything else they may ultimately want to add to the situation? So
this is going to be
they're not as bad. They're not as bad off as I think some people think, especially when you actually look at their cap sheet. They're in a decent position, especially if they let Barnes walk altogether or figure out a way to keep him at a team friendly price.
Right now, there is some good trouble going on in Sacramento. Right now, there's some good trouble. I think that if you're the Sacramento Kings, you should not be even worrying about free agency or anything like that if what you're getting from this team is on an upside. Like, the upside of everything is all of these guys can improve next year. All of these guys can get better next year. Now, if you're saying that you have to consider replacing Harrison Barnes, well, I hate using Harrison Barnes as the outlier, bro. But like when the Golden State Warriors said, we about trying to win this chip. if I'm gonna replace Harrison Barnes, I gotta replace nothing better than improving and exponentially. If not, then that's the reason why you drafted Keegan Murray. And if Keegan Murray has shown you that he can win, that all he needs is more minutes, and he needs more opportunities, more chances, and he can find out within the crux of the way that this offense is already designed, you don't even start talking about free agency, get this person, and the guy that you're getting is sucking minutes away from what you're getting from your core guys already. This is where the Sacramento Kings, who want to conquer, need to start looking at their core players and start establishing them as, here's our core 4, here's our core 3, here's our core 5. These guys are the pillars to what's going on. And if you're going to add players, you're not adding them for that small talk that we keep, like I tell you, it gnaws at me when we talk about get that veteran. He's a veteran guy. He's a good guy. You're talking a lot. No. You're getting a guy to go in there to replace or to supplement or to fortify what is lacking, that this team didn't get to that next round in the playoffs. It didn't get them to the Western Conference Finals. It didn't get them to the finals. You're getting a piece in there that is taking them over the top. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Other than that, you work with the core pieces that you got and you make them better. And that's how you know that what you've got is long and sustainable.
Well, I'm going to close with this thing here for Sacramento. So obviously things have got to play themselves out for the rest of this year. But and your last point, I think they're still going to want somebody who's more than maybe just 3-and-D, somebody who can still score and, whatever, even 15 a game like Barnes is, but play hellacious defense. If I'm Sacramento, it's going to cost you. But this offseason, you go see, hey, what's up, Brooklyn? Do you really want to hold on to that Mikal Bridges guy? Do you really want that? Can we offer you a couple first-round picks and even Keegan Murray and so forth and so forth? And you bring a guy like Bridges, who is a stalwart defensively, so to speak, and can now fill it up when you give him some open shots. And then you can really start to be cooking with gas where you're starting to build on both sides of the basketball, or then they kick the tires on an OG Anunoby or things like that too. So to me, Sacramento was in a very good position, and especially if they can have a good showing, and it's all going to be about matchups in the playoffs. But really excited that we're here on the baseline, being able to light the beam with Sacramento, because it's been a long time coming, and this is a great story for the NBA.
Forever. I'm sorry. Should we go Quantum Mania?
Yeah.
How about them Kangs?
Kangs.
Slinging them Kangs. Anyway, great show this week, Shaw, man. This has been good stuff. Like I said, man, 2 different teams with 2 totally different perspectives, philosophical perspective about what their franchises are going to look like moving forward. And one is on the precipice of, are they going to be good? Or are they just going to be who they were? And the other one is this too good to be true? And what do we got to do to keep us in this dreamland right now of winning basketball games and being relevant? You know what I'm saying? Right now, our boy Bobby Jackson probably thinking, damn, I'm loving what I'm seeing right now. It's good to have been a Sacramento King. You know what I'm saying? When I got my team playing like on this type of level, man. And to me, like I said, man, the NBA is always good when teams like the Kings are competitive and are making noise in the Western Conference.
Yes, sir. A great one as always. So we'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on the Hawks and Sacramento. Where you think these teams are going, how will they finish out their season? What are your thoughts on Trae Young? Again, we're not saying it's been out there in the Twitterverse that, do you feel he might be a little bit of a coach killer, or is that just too harsh? And the situation in Atlanta is something that still needs some time to kind of develop. And even Trae Young as a young professional still needs some time to develop. But again, this was a spicy one. So I hope our fans and listeners can dig in and really enjoy it and let us know what they thought about these 2 teams this year.
Absolutely, man. Once again, we'd like to thank you and yours for hopping on board with us this week for the Baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. We do. Catch up with you next time.